Neuromuscular development. A mature neuromuscular controlled movement of the mandible requires the presence and articulation of the teeth and proprioceptive input from the periodontium. Thus, the contact of opposing first primary molars is the beginning of the development of occlusion and a neuromuscular substrate for more complex mandibular and tongue functions. Primary dentition. The primary or deciduous dentition is considered to be completed by about 30 months or when the second primary molars are in occlusion. You can see in the figure 2.9. The figure 2.9 showing the skull of a child 4 years old with completed primary dentition. In picture A, you can see it is completed by about 30 months. That is 30 months. And in picture B, you can see completed primary dentition. Note the incisal wear. Note the incisal wear also. Right. Now have a look over the primary dentition. The dentition period includes the time when no apparent changes occur intraorally, that is from about 30 months to about 66 years of age. That is the primary dentition period. That is from about 30 months to about 6 years of age is called the primary dentition period. In this time, no apparent changes occur intraorally. The form of the dental arch remains relatively constant without significant changes in depth or width. A slight increase in the intercanine width occurs about the time the primary incisors are lost, and an increase in size in both jaws in sagittal direction is consistent with the space needed to accommodate the succedaneous teeth. An increase in the vertical dimension of the facial skeleton occurs as a result of alveolar bone deposition, condyle growth, and deposition of bone at the synchondrosis of the basal part of the occipital bone. Deposition of bone at the synchondrosis of the basal part of the occipital bone and sphenoid bones, and the maxillary suture complex. The splagecranium remains same in comparison with the neurocranium. Means the ratio of splagecranium to neurocranium remains the same. The part of the jaws that contain the primary teeth has almost reached adult width. At the first part of the transition period, which occurs at about 8 years of age, the width of the mandible approximates the width of the neurocranium. The dental arches are complete and the occlusion of the primary dentition is functional. During this period, attrition is sufficient in many children and is quite observable. During this period, attrition is sufficient in many children and is quite observable. Primary occlusion is considered in chapter 16. Transitional or mixed dentition period. The first transition dentition begins with the emergence and eruption of the permanent mandibular first molars and ends with the loss of the last primary tooth. The first transition dentition begins with the emergence and the eruption of the permanent mandibular first molars. Emergence and eruption of the permanent mandibular first molars and ends with the loss of the last primary tooth, which usually occurs at about age 11 to 12. The initial phase of the transition period lasts about 2 years, during which time the permanent first molars erupt. You can see in the figure 2.10 and 2.11. See, this is the figure 2.10. This is the showing primary dentation with first permanent molars present. In picture A, you can see the maxillary arch with permanent first molars, and in picture B you can see the mandibular arch showing the permanent first molars, and in figure 2.11 the same child as in figure 2.10. He writes in picture A the right side and picture B the left side, and in picture picture B is left side, showing the position of the first permanent molars and empty bony crypt of developing second molar lost during preparation of the specimen. In picture C, you can see front view of the view showing right side with bone covering roots and the developing permanent teeth, and left side with developing anterior permanent teeth. The primary incisors are shed and the permanent incisors are emerge and erupt into the position. You can see in the figure 2.12. Figure 2.12 showing the eruption of the permanent central incisors. Note the incisor edges demonstrating mamelons and the width of the emerging incisors and the width of the emerging incisors. The permanent teeth do not begin eruptive movements until after the crown is completed. The permanent teeth do not begin eruptive movements until after the crown is completed. During eruption, the permanent mandibular first molar is guided by the distal surface of the second primary molar. If the distal step in the terminal plane is evident, malocclusion occurs. You can see this in figure 16.5. Now have a discussion over the loss of the primary teeth. Loss of the primary teeth. The premature loss of primary teeth because of caries has an effect on the development of the permanent dentition. This not only may reflect an unfortunate lack of knowledge as to the course of disease, but also establish a negative attitude about preventing dental caries in the adult dentition. Loss of primary teeth may lead to the lack of space for the permanent dentition. It is sometimes assumed by laypersons that the loss of primary teeth, which are sometimes referred to as baby teeth or milk teeth, is of little consequence because they are only temporary. However, the primary dentition may be in use from age 2 to 7 or older, or about 5 or more years. In all, some of the teeth are in use from 6 months until 12 years of age, or 11.5 years in all. Thus, these primary teeth are in use and contributing to the health and well-being of the individual during the first years of greatest development, physically and mentally. Premature loss of the primary teeth, retention of primary teeth, congenital absence of teeth, dental anomalies, and insufficient spaces are considered important factors in the initiation and development of an abnormal occlusion. Premature loss of primary teeth from dental neglect is likely to cause a loss of arch length with a consequent tendency for crowding in the permanent teeth. Arch length is considered in more detail in chapter 16. Now have a look over the permanent dentition. The permanent dentition consisting of 32 teeth is completed from 18 to 25 years of age if the third molar is included. Apparently, there are 4 or more centers of formation, that is, developmental lobes for each tooth. Apparently, there are 4 or more centers of formation, that is, developmental lobes for each tooth in permanent tooth. The formation of each center proceeds until a coalescence of all of them takes place. During this period of odontogenesis, injury to the developing tooth can lead to anomalous morphological features. For example, peg-shaped maxillary lateral incisor is due to a injury to the developing tooth, leading to anomalous morphological feature, say peg-shaped lateral incisor. Although no lines of demarcation are found in the dentin. Although no lines of demarcation are found in the dentin to show this development, signs are found on the surfaces of the crowns and roots. These are called developmental grooves. You can see the figure 4.12b. Fractures of the teeth occur most commonly along these grooves. Fractures of the teeth occur most commonly along these grooves. Right, you can see in the figure 13.26. The follicles of the developing incisors and canines are in a position lingual to the deciduous root. You can see the figure 2.7 and 2.11. You can also see the figure 3.4. Let's have a look over 2.7 figure and 2.11 figure. In this figure, you can see the follicles of the developing incisors and canines is located lingual to the deciduous roots. See, you can see the follicles of the developing incisors and canines are in a position lingual to the deciduous roots. The developing premolars, which eventually take the place of deciduous molars, or within the bifurcation of primary molar roots. You can see in the figure 2.13 A and B. Right, this is figure 2.13 A and B. Figure A, that is picture A, the view of the right side of the skull of a child of 9 to 10 years of age. Note the amount of resorption of the roots of the primary maxillary molars. The relationship of the developing molars above them and the open pulp chambers and pulp canals in the developing mandibular teeth. The roots of the first permanent molars have been completed in picture B, that is on the left side. Left side, note the placement of permanent maxillary canine and second premolar and the position and stage of development of maxillary second permanent molar. The bony crypt of the last mandibular second permanent premolar is in full view. Note the large openings in the roots of the mandibular second permanent molar. The permanent incisors, canines and premolars are called succedaneous teeth because they take the place of their primary predecessors. The central incisor is the second permanent tooth to emerge into the oral cavity. The eruption time is quite close to that of the first molar, that is, tooth emergence occurs between 6 and 7 years. You can see in the table 2.2 showing the chronology of permanent dentition. As with the first molar at age 6 years, 50% of the individuals have reached the stage. Consider the age of attainment of the stage, or more specifically the age of eruption, the age of emergence for the central incisor. The mandibular permanent teeth tend to erupt before the maxillary teeth. The mandibular central incisors usually erupts before the maxillary central incisor. You can see in the figure 2.12. This is the figure 2.12. That is, mandibular central incisors usually erupts before the maxillary central incisor and may erupt simultaneously with or even before the mandibular first molar, and may erupt simultaneously with or even before the mandibular first molar. The mandibular lateral incisor may erupt along with the central incisor before the permanent central incisor can come into position. The primary central incisor must be exfoliated. Before the permanent central incisor can come into position, the primary central incisor must be exfoliated. This occurs through the resorption of the deciduous roots. The permanent tooth in its follicle attempts to move into the position held by its predecessor. Its influence on the primary root evidently causes resorption of the roots, which continues until the primary crown has lost its anchorage. which continues until the primary crown has lost its anchorage, becomes loose, and finally exfoliated. In the meantime, the permanent tooth has moved occlusally so that when primary tooth is lost, the permanent one is at the point of eruption and in proper position to succeed its predecessor. Mandibular lateral incisors erupt very soon after central incisors, often simultaneously. The maxillary central incisors erupt next in chronological order. Next in chronological order. The maxillary central incisor erupt next in chronological order, and maxillary lateral incisors make their appearance about 1 year later. You can see in the table 2.2 and figures 2.3 and 2.4. This is the figures 2.3 and 2.4. Right. The first premolars follow the maxillary laterals in sequence. When the child is about 10 years old, the mandibular canines or cuspids often appear at the same time. The second premolars follow during the next year, and then the maxillary canines follow. Usually, the second molars come in when the individual is about 12 years of age. They are posterior to the first molars and are commonly called 12-year molars. The maxillary canines occasionally erupt along with the second molars, that is, around 12 years of age. But in most instances of normal eruption, the canine precede them somewhat. The third molars do not come in until age 17 or later. Considerable posterior jaw growth is required after age 12. Considerable posterior jaw growth is required after age 12 to allow room for these teeth. We can see in the figure 2.14a and b. The figure 2.14, the development of the maxillary A in A and mandibular third molars. Picture A showing the development of maxillary molars and picture B showing development of mandibular molars. Right. The third molars are subject to many anomalies. The third molars are subject to many anomalies and variations of form. Insufficient jaw development for their accommodation complicates matters in the majority of cases. Individuals who have properly developed third molars in good alignment are very much in the minority. Individuals who have properly developed third molars in good alignment are very much in the minority. Third molar anomalies and variations with the complications Third molar anomalies and variations with the complications brought about by misalignment and subnormal jaw development compromise a subject too vast to be covered here. Figure 2.15 shows an anatomical specimen with a full complement of 32 teeth. Figure 2.15, the maxillary and mandibular arches with full complement of 32 teeth. Picture A showing the maxillary arch and picture B showing the mandibular arch. Now have a look over the size of the teeth. The size of the teeth is largely genetically determined. However, marked racial differences do exist, as with the Lapps, a population with perhaps the smallest teeth, and the Australian Aborigines with perhaps the largest teeth. Gender size dimorphism differences average about 4% and are the greatest for the maxillary canine and least for the incisors. Often encounter is disharmony between the size of the teeth and bone size. The tooth size and arch size are considered in Chapter 16 relative to the development of occlusion. Tooth size and arch size are considered in Chapter 16 relative to the development of occlusion.